Hello, welcome to Overcome with Travis White. I am flying solo tonight. There's no guest, but let's just jump right into this episode. So, this is something that has been weighing on my mind for some time. I have been podcasting for well over a year now. I just recorded I just released my 83rd episode last week. So, that's an accomplishment for me. Most of these conversations have been with guests. Although I have a few solo episodes uh, sharing my own experiences. And when I look back on all of them, we've covered a lot of ground. There's been multiple stories that cover the same thing. Uh, One thing I know is everyone has a story, but we've covered things such as depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma, grief, chronic illness, burnout, relationships, recovery, and I'm sure there's more. But there's been one question weighing pretty heavy on my mind lately. And that's after all of these conversations, what have I actually learned about mental health? I'm not talking about one diagnosis or one person's experience. Like, what have I actually learned about people when it comes to mental health conditions? Or, because after doing this for so long, you start to notice patterns, and that's where I'm at. There's been times where I've heard things that have challenged what I believe. And I've also had times where it's challenged how I think about other people. So I'd say in the last year and a half, I do think a little bit differently about other people as well as myself, especially when it comes to mental health, because there's a lot of things that I didn't know before. And there might be some things that I knew, I just didn't really think about. So that's basically what I want to talk about today is what I've learned about mental health after a year of podcasting. So the first thing that I've learned is something that I think we all need to remember, because I think we run into this a lot more than we really notice. And that's is looking okay doesn't mean that you're okay. There's been stories that I've heard on this podcast as well as in other spots or other places that there's so many people that uh, fake what they're going through. They seem totally, I shouldn't say fake what they're going through. They seem totally fine on the outside, but on the inside, they're very much struggling. Because mental health doesn't always look like somebody's falling apart. It's possible for people to still work, laugh, socialize, and totally pretend that everything is okay. I think that this is basically referred to as high functioning mental health, and I've seen that happen a lot. And it's some of the highest performers that I've ever worked with struggle with this. But when you really get down to speaking with these people, there's a different type of pain that they'll admit to. But these are the type of people that usually never complain. They're always working. They're always strong. And I've been this person multiple times. For example, I use humor a lot to hide what I'm going through. If I'm really anxious or feeling depressed, I'll try to say something funny to make people laugh or make myself laugh to lighten the mood. But uh, deep down, I'm not okay. And I believe that uh, these people that describe themselves as high functioning, they keep themselves busy on purpose. And that's to stop them from dealing what is really going on underneath the surface. And I was thinking about this. I wondered, well, has there ever been a time that I've looked okay on the outside and I absolutely was not okay? And yes, there's been multiple times. Main time in my life that comes to mind is when I was, well, I shouldn't say a specific time because this has been the span of years, but I always go back to my seizures. Because as I've talked about before, my seizures caused a lot of anxiety, depression, and dissociation, among other things. And for the longest time, many people did not have a clue what I was going through because I'd mask it. Especially, I look back and I think of, especially when I was going to college, probably my last 2 years, especially, yeah, probably most of my last 2 years, uh, I was in a very, very bad spot. And I didn't really always talk about that part of me, especially the depression and darkness part, that the shadow that was casting over me. And it was a tough time, but I've seen that many times in my life. And one thing about this I've learned is that it's changed the way I look at people who seem fine. I don't assume that people are fine just because they seem fine, because we get so good at hiding stuff, especially if you've been on the side of the suffering. So, something I want you to think about as you're listening to the rest of this podcast, or maybe you sit down, write this question down, and come back to it later. Have you ever looked completely fine during one of the hardest periods of your life? What does that look like? The next thing that I've learned is healing isn't linear, whatever. I can't talk. So from the beginning to the end, it does not go from bad to good. You're always gonna have your ups and downs through anything that you're experiencing. And this I've always known this um, part. It's just I've seen a different side of it because I've heard so many stories of, oh, I thought I was done. I thought I was in a good spot, but then this happened. So then it brought back my anxiety, it brought back my depression. So like it's I'm not saying a bad day erases the 6 months of the hard work that you've put in, because that would be a total lie. And one little setback is not the same as starting over. But as you're continuing to heal, and it is an ongoing process, just know that these things can return, and they will hit you unexpectedly. But I also look at it this way. I think about myself now compared to who I was even 3 or 4 years ago. And well, I still feel like I'm healing and still feel like I'm pushing past the hard and There's certain things in my life that I know are not going to go away, but I can control certain aspects of them. For example, with my seizures, I can control what I eat. I can control my diet, which I flat out believe has been linked to my seizures. So I have and then the seizures will cause the anxiety or whatever. But I have certain tools in my life that I did not have before that I can use now to help me push through the things that return. Because I will say for certain that for the most part, and to me, in my eyes, my opinion, I'm no therapist, I'm no doctor, but anxiety and depression don't just go away. You have to learn techniques to control them. But don't get me wrong, when I have guests that come on and say, you know what? Well, let me back up. When I have guests that come on and tell me some clean recovery story, how they struggled and then there was a breakthrough and bam, it was fixed. I love those stories. Who doesn't love a clean recovery story? But let's face it, real life usually isn't like that. But there are those stories and I love them. So I still feel like let me think back. There's been times, multiple times too, as I've thought through this, that let me use an example of back in the end of 2024. That's when I had a big cluster of seizures and struggled big time with, especially with depression. It was a very dark time for me, and I felt like I was back to square one. So, this is all starting over. I have to go through this all again. Have I not learned anything in the last 10 plus years? So that was the biggest time where I thought that I was back to square one. But I also believe that was the time that really pushed me to start healing. So here's another question to think about. I'm going to leave you with a question to think about after every kind of section or segment that I maybe lesson that I talk about. Have you ever convinced yourself that you're back at the beginning simply because you struggled again? Here's another big lesson that I learned. And this one, I don't think I ever thought about. So the third one is sometimes the thing hurting you started as something protecting you. This has been an interesting one for me. A couple examples um, that I've of stories that I've heard from stories that I've heard. Addiction often starts as an attempt to numb pain. Um, Anger often protects what's underneath it and some kind of past experience. People pleasing can often be protecting conflict or abandonment. And another one is isolation, often feels safer than risking being hurt. The list still goes on and on. But this doesn't give you the excuse to use destructive behavior at all. One of the biggest parts of moving forward with mental health issues is being accountable. And that still matters. The biggest part of understanding this is trying to figure out the why of why something developed so you can change it. So going back to, are you angry all the time? Well, where's that anger stemming from? Like, what is it underneath that you're going through or you've experienced in the past that keeps that anger going? For I can speak on this. I it may be a genetic thing. I'm sure it is, but I do get some. Uh, I do have some anger problems, and I work on them constantly. I'm not always perfect. But that's the best part of about being human. We're allowed to make mistakes. But I can tell you that I often set that anger up as a defense mechanism because I feel like people are attacking me. I take things really personal. And that's an issue that I need to correct. Let's see, there's a couple other thoughts here that I'm trying to. Uh, I just slipped my mind. But I just feel like once you understand the why, it's easier to move on and fix these behaviors. It's not always easy to admit that you have a problem, though. So the question to think about is, what behavior have you judged in yourself without asking what purpose it originally served? Let me say that one more time. What behavior have you judged in yourself without asking what purpose it originally served? So this next one is probably one of the biggest ones because it's been brought up time and time again. This is talking about community. So the lesson learned is people need connection more than they need fixing. There have been countless um, guests that I've had on whose turning points came because somebody was there. And I'm not saying that person had perfect advice for them, because probably not the case. That person or community doesn't even need to solve anything. Like, they could be there just to listen. But I've said that this has been brought up multiple times, that part of the healing process is to have a community of people. Maybe it's just one person, just somebody in your corner to cheer you on, to listen, to give you advice when needed, and to help you celebrate the small wins or maybe the bigger ones. But also, the biggest one for me is somebody that believes in them. Um, for me, this would be my wife. She's been there through the ups and downs, the good, the bad, the ugly. But she is my safe space. I feel like I could tell her everything. Well, most of the time. There's times where in the past where I know that I've um, maybe hidden or not communicated so well of how I felt, and I'm still not the best communicator. But if it wasn't for her, I would not be where I am today. And coming from the side of things where I'm the person who's experienced the mental health issues, oftentimes it's all I need is somebody just to listen. I don't need you to fix me, because when you try to fix me, I oftentimes shut down. You don't need to be my therapist. But I actually, this reminds me of a comment that I got on YouTube. It was a short, and the short had one of my guests talking about men being able to open up, and that it's actually a really good thing that we're having more talk about men's mental health. And the comment, this isn't verbatim, but it was along the lines of like, when was it noble for men to speak out with their problems? Keep your problems to yourself, you pathetic boy. Where did that come from? Asking for help isn't not a weakness. Telling your story is not a weakness. Sometimes asking for help is taking responsibility for yourself. It's finally coming out of your shell and admitting that there's something wrong with you. There's another story that comes to mind. This one also dates back to 2024. Uh, this is a moment when a friend of mine told me about their suicide attempt that I had no idea existed. And from then on, I started telling this person when I had a bad day because I know that he wouldn't always try to give me advice. He'd listen, even if he didn't even reply back. If he just liked my text, I knew that he was reading it. And that's all I needed. And oftentimes I chose him because he went through some similar experiences. But and now this here's the question to think about for this um, part. Is there someone in your life that you could actually tell the truth to? That you actually trust enough to tell all your dirty little secrets? We'll call your dirty little secrets. The next lesson relates a lot to, let's call it the stigma of mental health. And this lesson is mental health doesn't just happen in your head. This is a huge recurring theme that I didn't want to overlook. Because oftentimes you'll hear the phrase, oh, it's all in your head. It's just a phase. You'll get over it. Or just sleep it off. None of those are good advice. And mental health isn't all in your head. It's a whole body thing, and it's all connected. For the longest time, I actually thought that mental health was all in your head, but the more episodes I've done, the more I've learned, and I've talked to functional medicine doctors who've said, no, this is all connected. Sleep matters. Chronic pain matters. Hormones matter. Nutrition, the way your body handles stress, like trauma, all this stuff matters. They're all connected. Now, like I mentioned before, that I'm no doctor, so I can't tell you how, but mental and physical health are not two completely separate systems. They're linked together. And by no means am I saying that every mental health condition can be fixed with sleep, exercise, or diet, because that's not true. I can tell you that when I eat better, I do feel like my anxiety goes down. But there's also other causes to my anxiety, so it's not always the case. But sometimes I feel, once again, just stating my opinion, that that's the problem we have with medicine here in the United States. We don't always look at the person as a whole. We want to treat everything like as its own separate entity. For example, you have a heart condition, you go to the or heart doctor. Uh, you have a brain issue, you go to the neurologist. They're not telling you that those things, like, they're often not telling you that those things could be connected. I look back at my seizures, and they never told me that once that my seizures could be affected by my diet. It took me years to figure that out. Years and years to figure that out. So, and it's in the if your physical health is bad, most likely it's going to cause a mental health issue. I can full on attest for that. And once I uh, connected the two, physical and mental health, and it did something about it, it did change. It's the question for this one, question for you to think about. Write this down. How has my own physical health affected my mental health? See if there's anything you can come up with. This next was another huge lesson. Grace and accountability can exist together. We often think that being hard on ourselves will motivate us and push us ourselves to the next level. You repeat in your head, "Oh, I can do better. Why can't I handle this? What's wrong with me? Oh, I messed up again." That's not motivation. That's shame. And what does shame do? It often makes you feel trapped. The, this one, the word grace has come up multiple times throughout the last year and a half. And I've said it multiple times as well. One of the biggest life changers for me when it comes to how I think about myself is showing myself grace. Showing yourself grace doesn't mean you're avoiding accountability or responsibility. It means that to me, it's acknowledging that, you know what, I messed up. I'm okay. I can move on. I can change this. How do I do that? It's giving me the ability to try again without doing it in such a harsh way that make myself feel worthless. It's showing yourself a little honesty and compassion. I don't think in any way it means that you're lowering your standards. In no way is it lowering your standards. For me, it was over the years, I've been extremely hard on myself. And I am the first one to put myself down. So it took some time to learn how to show myself grace. And I still can't always tell you what that looks like, but I can tell you I've allowed myself to make more mistakes and not be so harsh on myself because I somehow thought that beating myself up was better, that telling myself that I was a piece of shit or not good enough was better. But now I can fall and say, I can look in the mirror after I've made a mistake and be like, you know what? It's going to be okay. What did I learn? I can try again tomorrow. So, what does showing grace look like to you? Like, showing yourself grace look like to you? Um, one of the most, this may be one of the most important questions to think about as I continue on or throughout this podcast or this episode. Would you talk to someone you love the way you talk to yourself? Because there's times for me, I would say no. Well, I feel like I'm overall doing better and talking to myself in a more respectful way. I still have my moments. And I actually am trying this thing. So for you that have been following me, I created the faith framework. You know, it's a easy framework to remember. And I believe it helps people understand uh, where they've been, reconnect with who they are, and rebuild faith in themselves. And it's just one small step at a time. And I'm sure I did have an underlying place I was going with that, but I'll just move on because I can't remember. Next, we have the small things are usually the big things. Throughout all the stories of recovery and mental health and overcoming this and that, there's most of the time there's not some huge breakthrough moment. It's usually just small, ordinary things. I remember there's been multiple guests that have talked about just getting out of bed and how much that helped them realize that they were worth it. Some of it has been taking a walk, uh, getting enough sleep, journaling. This was what I was going to talk about. Um, just a couple minutes ago, I brought up the faith framework. I am working on some stuff and I've been journaling for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I've been using my faith framework to do so because I want to test it out. But somewhere down the road, I want to release this. And I will say it has a little bit of something to do with AI because, well, AI specific ways scares the crap out of me. I also feel like it's a good tool if you learn how to use it correctly. And journaling, starting to journal has helped me immensely. I can see a huge difference every day that I write down my thoughts and I'm able to get out that frustration. But the way I'm doing it with the faith framework is very simple. It's like 5 questions a day, all based. So, foundation, what motivates you today? Attitude, what attitude are you choosing today to help you push forward? Integrity, what promise do you want to keep to yourself? Or what promise, what promise do you need to keep to yourself to um, help you throughout this week? Uh, Trust. The question that's been coming up with trust is what do you need to trust yourself with? Or what instinct do you need to trust? Something along those lines. Today to help you push through. Or maybe it's who do you need to trust? And then age is humility, and that one has been along the lines of what do you need to let go of or accept to help you grow. Right. All right, back on track here. Small things are usually the big things. We're talking about how there's usually no giant breakthrough. It's just the small things that help you get through these and help you carry on. To me, a lot of times this is like starting starting a habit, getting into the habit of doing something. It could be, keeping a routine or getting up in the morning to exercise. Just a small little step or small little thing that motivates you to move on to the next day. Because it's the smallest things that make you rebuild trust in yourself. And this leads into bigger things. In uh, but another thing this brings up though too is we often celebrate only the big stuff, but I also believe that we need to celebrate our small wins, and these could be those small wins. So a couple of small things that have made a huge difference in my life is I just talked about journaling, going outside more has been a big one for me. Learning techniques to help me get through the day. A little bit of breath work here and there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. And I think that some of these little things seem really insignificant at first until you get a handle on them, and then you'll be able to see the differences. So, question to think about. What is one small thing you could actually repeat tomorrow? Something that will help you become more motivated. The next one, also, I'm going to say this probably about all the rest of them. Also, another huge one. This is once again one that I've never thought about. Mental health is not one size fits all. This is just one that has been reinforced over all of my podcast episodes. Two people can have anxiety, but need completely different things. I came from the side of things like, well, maybe if I take medication, it must be the only thing that works. No, I can tell you that I've had people come on and say, medication was great for me. And other people come on and say, no, medication, I don't want to do it. Uh, and there's often times where people live the same diagnosis, but just the experience is totally different. But because of that diagnosis, that's where their story intersects and they find that common ground. Now, oftentimes the diagnosis for a mental health issue can take time. And there's oftentimes where people are misdiagnosed. I don't remember specifically what episode it was on, but I remember speaking to a guy who, well, this has happened to a guy and some lady that was on that they were misdiagnosed and they were the doctor put them on the wrong prescription and they went years with all these bad side effects and stuff that didn't work and trying different medications because that diagnosis was wrong. Another thing that I want to bring up is oftentimes the first treatment does not work. I, my buddy had to take multiple different types of medication to help calm his anxiety. Another thing going on with this is therapy isn't for everybody. I personally I like therapy. I think it helps me talk through stuff that I would oftentimes would not bring up. But then other people have used faith or religion to get through stuff, community movement, like exercise and stuff, mindfulness, breath work. There's different types of uh, therapy you can do, like EMDR is one of them. It's eye movement stuff, lifestyle changes. There's so many different things you could do to help your mental health. And just because one thing fails doesn't mean that everything's going to fail. Sometimes it does take time. It takes time to figure out what's going to work for you. And it can be frustrating. But once you find that one thing, it really does make you feel better. But I'm still learning, to be honest, what works for me and what doesn't. I can say that me personally, I'm not a huge fan of medication. But if you are, that's great. And I'm just barely getting into journaling. I've gotten a little bit into breath work, but it's just trial and error. So here's the question to think about. Have you blamed yourself because someone else's solution didn't work for you? Go and try a few different things. I promise you'll find something. So this one has come up multiple times as well. Your struggle is part of your story, not your identity. Getting a diagnosis explains something about you, but it does not define you. Just like trauma is something that happened to you. Addiction is part of your story. And all these things can change you, but they should not be your identity. And I think oftentimes this happened to me. My seizures started back in 2009. I believe that they made me lose my identity for a time. They made me lose a sense of who I was. And I very much lost my independence. And I've often heard guests talk about losing their identity through through their struggles, such as careers, relationships, etc. And as you're going through all your trials and challenges, you don't always get the old version of yourself back. Sometimes a lot of guests have reinvented who they were, and not saying that they're deep down they're not the same person. There's just their life is different than it was before. I had multiple people who have come on and they were alcoholics. And part of their identity loss was the loss of friends. So they had to go out and find new friends. And I think part of my problem throughout the years is I've spent so much time trying to be the old me that I didn't look too much into the me that I've been trying to become. So it's almost made me stay stuck for longer. So it's really been making me think of who am I becoming now? Like, who do I want to be? And I think hosting this podcast has helped me figure that out a little bit because I'm actually finding that I do have a newfound passion in life. I've always loved mental health. I've always loved helping people, but now I really have the desire to help change people. So the question I want to leave you with this is, uh, did I spend time trying to become the old me again? Have you experienced a time in your life where you've lost your identity and you've been stuck trying to find the old you? And the last lesson that I've learned, sorry, this has been a lot of talking for me. This is my all time favorite. They're all my favorites. Everyone has a story. What you do with it matters. This is probably the coolest thing that podcasting has taught me. If you sit down and really talk to people, they all have a story. We're all experiencing stuff. We're all going through stuff. And there's been stories, and I often will be sitting there in the podcast of, as I'm interviewing a guest, thinking, oh, well, I can't imagine experiencing that. And I compare myself to them, but don't, I want to say this again. Well, I haven't said it in this episode, but I brought it up. Don't ever compare your story to somebody else's because every story is just as important as the last. But a lot of these stories have, completely different from mine, but they've made me recognize pieces of myself. I often say that each episode is like a free therapy session because I'm learning stuff from it. And it's what you do with your story. Like, are you helping others? Did you get, are you parenting differently? Are you providing a service? Like what is the purpose that that story brings into your life? And I'm not saying that these stories, what happened to you is a good thing. And I'm not trying to romanticize suffering because it's never fun, but we all suffer. And I'm using my story to try to reach out to help people. I want to speak at events. I want to keep carrying on this platform for people to tell their stories. I love having this platform. We don't need to, this doesn't mean we have to say that everything happens for a reason. You don't have to be grateful for the thing that hurt you. And your pain isn't going to be erased. But after what you experienced, after what you've experienced, I think a good question to ask is, what do I do now? And like I said, all this leads back to why this podcast even exists. I've mentioned the end of 2024 with the cluster of seizures several times throughout this episode. And that is why this podcast exists. Throughout that time, I was suffering from suicidal ideation and just in a really dark, crappy spot. And when I was able to push past it, I thought to myself, I want a place where people could tell their stories. And this is that. And I don't know if I would be having these conversations if that struggle or that challenge or trial didn't happen to me, because I don't think I would. I don't think I would even dare to tell my story publicly. It's not always easy being vulnerable. So a question to think about for this one. What have you learned through your experience that someone else might need? You do not have to call the pain a gift to decide it won't be wasted. So kind of a couple closing thoughts here. I don't think, after over a year of podcasting, I don't think mental health is about finding one secret. People can be complicated. Recovery is complicated. There's times where people look okay and they're not. Everybody has a story. Healing is hard. It's not linear. I can't say that word at all. We do need other people, and our physical health matters as well. There's I can say one thing, that this podcast has helped me become more compassionate towards other people. Not that I wasn't there before, because I've always, especially like, I always loved people and I've always wanted to find a way to help people. It was my dream at one point to go into psychology and become a therapist. But then I actually learned how much schooling it takes. I was like, yeah, that's just not me. I just want to be done with this. But I really believe now that this is my calling. This is what I am very passionate about. I want to help people, even if it's just that one person that reaches out, one person per episode reaches out and says, not even reaches out, maybe they just feel that it changed them. That's all I want. So here, let me repeat some of these again. People are complicated. Recovery is complicated. Sometimes people look okay when they're not. Healing isn't linear. Some of the behaviors we hate about ourselves have histories. We need other people. We need a community. Our physical health matters. Grace and accountability can coexist. Small actions matter. What works for one person might not work for another. And we are so much bigger than our diagnosis, that our diagnosis does not define us. Uh, but I think also the biggest thing that has changed me is I'm always very curious about people's backgrounds. And I feel like I'm less judgmental because you never know what someone else is carrying. There's been times where I've been sitting next to somebody and learned a little bit of information on them. And I'm like, well, I didn't even know you were going through that. And I don't have everything figured out. I'm still learning things, still going through the motions, still working on myself. And I often don't know what's coming next, but I believe I have the right tools in place, and I want you guys to be able to get the right tools for yourself. If we can continue to understand ourselves, continue to find out what helps, continue getting back up, continue to decide what you want next for the next part of your story to look like. Because everyone has a story, and your story matters. What happened to you matters, but it does not have to determine what happens next. You get to decide the next part of your story. And that is all that I have for tonight. Thanks to all that have listened. I know this was a mouthful for me to get through, so I hope somebody was able to learn something of it from it. And please, if this resonated with you, please follow us. It means the world. And leave us a 5-star review. Until next time.